My dad lifted his wine glass and said, "Your sister just bought herself a stunning house. When are you planning to catch up, Stella?" I pushed my chair back and walked out. Thanksgiving at our place had always followed a predictable script. No one ever said it out loud, but everyone acted like they were reading straight from a rehearsed scene. The glossy turkey, the perfectly ironed napkins, the soft jazz floating in the background like a movie soundtrack. Even the smiles felt practiced, as if maintaining the illusion mattered more than anything real. Every year we circled around that gleaming mahogany table, pretending nothing was fractured beneath the polish. And every single year, without missing a beat, my father made sure the spotlight never left my sister, Kara, the family's prized masterpiece. He'd lift his glass, full of pride and theatrics, and start his speech. "Your sister just purchased a beautiful home, 4 bedrooms, a porch you'd swear was from a magazine. She's always been the one ahead of the pack." Then, like clockwork, he'd swivel his gaze toward me with that familiar smile that pretended to be playful but wasn't. "When are you planning to catch up, Stella?" The chorus of polite chuckles would follow. My aunts, uncles, cousins, they'd shake their heads like Dad was just being Dad. But I didn't join in. I never did. I'd pull the corners of my mouth up, stay perfectly still, and play the role assigned to me. Stella, the quiet helper, the one who arrived before everyone to help arrange the plates, the one who carried the nicer bottle of wine because she didn't want to be rude, the one who folded the extra napkins and made sure every dessert had a serving spoon. And the questions they gave me, they were always surface level. "Still a bad little job?" Or, "Did you ever finish that certificate thing?" Not cruel, just empty. Questions meant to fill time instead of show interest. Meanwhile, Kara collected praise the way some people collected postcards. Promotions, a fancy ring, European trips, dream renovations. Every achievement of hers was treated like a family holiday. Dad would tap his glass and say, "Sharp as ever." Mom would nod proudly and murmur, "Our little firecracker." Kara would give a modest smile, pretending she wasn't basking in every bit of admiration. I used to convince myself it didn't bother me, that I liked being grounded, low maintenance, unnoticed, but that wasn't true. Every joke, every comment, every comparison left marks on me I never talked about. When I was 10, Kara got a perfect attendance ribbon. I had just won a statewide art competition, but that night, Dad mentioned her ribbon 3 times before dessert. No one mentioned my award once. When I was 16, I passed my driving test the first time. Kara failed twice. Dad laughed and said, "Stella only passed because the instructor was ready to go home." It became the pattern. She got the spotlight, I got the punchlines. And somehow, I let it convince me that I was always going to be second best. So I learned to stay quiet. While Kara talked about work victories and paint samples for her future kitchen, I waited for someone to ask me anything about what I was building. No one did. Not because they were cruel, but because to them, my silence meant nothing was happening. But I wasn't empty. I was tired. And this year, this Thanksgiving, I didn't come to play the part they wrote for me. I didn't come to look small or laugh along while Dad shared another heroic tale about Kara's unstoppable momentum. I walked in wearing a burgundy sweater I loved, holding a bottle of Pinot Noir, and carrying something new inside me. Not the need to prove anything, just the need to stop disappearing. It didn't shift overnight. There wasn't a massive blow-up or tears or shouting at the dinner table, no slam doors. What broke me happened subtly, almost silently. It began the year I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I lied to Mom, told her I was on a tight deadline and couldn't take time off. She accepted it easily, because asking me more would mean caring enough to dig deeper. I spent that holiday alone in my apartment, takeout containers on the table, wearing fuzzy socks while a Hallmark movie flickered in the background. I expected to feel lonely. I didn't. Instead, I felt peace. A quiet, honest kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. No comments about catching up, no measuring myself beside Kara, no subtle suggestion that I was an unfinished version of someone better.
And in that calm, I heard a voice I'd ignored for too long. My own. Once that happened, I started from scratch. No giant moves, just slow, stubborn ones. I took on freelance gigs everyone said wouldn't amount to anything. I built a client list brick by brick. I spent long nights teaching myself business skills I didn't have. 6 months later, I was earning more than I ever had. 10 months in, I moved out of my tiny apartment. And a little over a year after, I signed the paperwork on a house. Not a starter place, not a fixer-upper, a real home. Over 4,000 square feet of quiet, privacy, and something I had created completely alone. No big announcement, no posts, no champagne pictures, just me, my keys, and the sound of a door swinging open into a future I had carved by myself. Sometimes I wondered what Dad would say if he knew. Would he congratulate me? Would he rewrite the story and say he always believed in me? But he never asked. Not once. Even when I skipped 2 holidays in a row, he didn't check in. They all assumed I was drifting, because in their eyes, success had to be loud to count, and I had chosen to succeed quietly. It used to hurt. Now it just made things clearer. I had been scaling my own mountain. They were just too focused on Kara's to notice. So when this year's Thanksgiving message popped up, I hesitated. I almost said no again. But then I thought about that table, that script, that role I'd been performing my whole life. And something inside me decided I was done shrinking. I clicked yes. When I walked in that evening, the house looked exactly the same. Mom's perfect table, Dad sharpening the carving knife, smooth jazz floating through the speakers, Kara laughing too loudly at something Trevor said. But I wasn't the girl from previous years. My cousin Abby saw me take my seat and whispered, "You look incredible." Just that small moment felt like someone finally saw me in focus. I didn't need it, but it warmed something in me anyway. Dinner moved in the usual rhythm. Passing dishes, polite chatter, the clink of forks, Dad holding the room like he always did. Everyone revolving around Kara's presence as if she was the family's North Star. The difference was me. I didn't fold inward. I didn't wait for a cue. I just existed, calm and steady. Then came dessert, pecan pie, Dad's signature favorite. And right when he finished his slice, he placed the fork down, wiped his mouth, and raised his voice with that familiar tone that demanded attention. "Well," he announced, "your sister has more exciting news. Kara just bought a gorgeous new home. 4 bedrooms, granite countertops, a big wraparound porch, just beautiful." A wave of admiration swept through the room. Aunt Carl gasped. Trevor's mother beamed. Trevor sat up straighter. And, on cue, Dad turned his gaze toward me. "Stella, when are you going to catch up, huh?" There it was. The line. The script. The moment I always swallowed. But this time, every pair of eyes turned toward me, and I didn't flinch. I didn't force a laugh. I didn't shrink in my chair. I simply looked my father in the eye and let a calm smile settle on my face. "I already did," I said, "just didn't invite anyone who doubted me." Everything froze for a second. Not a dramatic crash, but a sudden, sharp stillness. Kara's fork hung in midair. Trevor blinked twice. Aunt Carl frowned as if she missed the joke. Mom's hand froze mid-pour.
"You did?" I lifted my glass, took a slow sip, and nodded. "About a year ago." "A year?" Mom repeated quietly, eyes darting. "Why didn't you tell us?" "It never really came up." The truth slipped out so gently, yet it hit the room like cold water. I didn't yell. I didn't lash out. I simply handed them a mirror they'd never looked into, and I let them sit with the reflection. Dad laughed, the kind of tight, forced laugh he used when he felt himself losing ground. "Well," he muttered, waving a hand, "that's vague." "It's not," I said evenly. "You asked a question. I answered it." He glanced around the table, searching for support, trying to pull the narrative back into his hands. "So, you bought a house?" he asked, doubt dripping from each word. "I have," I replied, "paid for entirely." That did it. The entire room shifted. Not resentment, not yet. First, confusion, then recalculations. Aunt Carol breathed out a soft, "Oh." Trevor's eyes widened again. Kara straightened in her chair, posture stiffening. Dad chuckled weakly. "That's a lot of space for someone living alone." "Maybe," I said, reaching calmly for a roll. "But like I said, no mortgage, so it's not a problem." Still no anger, just truth. The silence wasn't awkward, it was adjusting, like the room was slowly catching up to a reality they hadn't even considered. And I let them. I didn't rush to soften it, didn't pad it with self-deprecation. They had spent so long scripting who I was. Now they had to face the unscripted version. Dad didn't know what to do with the silence. He fumbled for a tone, humor, disbelief, maybe even praise, but none of them landed. I watched as his smile flickered, then faded altogether. Kara was the first to speak. Of course she was. "That's great, Stella," she said with the kind of syrupy sweetness that tried to sound supportive but landed hollow. "Buying a house is a big deal. You didn't want to share that with your family?" I met her gaze directly. "You mean the family that only ever asks how close I am to being like you?" Her expression cracked just slightly. A flicker in her eyes, a shift in her jaw. "I didn't hide it out of spite," I continued. "I just didn't feel the need to explode myself anymore." Dad leaned forward, trying to pull the conversation back into something he could steer. "So what kind of work are you doing now? I thought you were still freelancing." I was. Now I run my own consultancy, 6 clients under retainer. Mom blinked. 6? I nodded. Financially independent. No loans. No help. Dad sat back in his chair like he'd been hit with a gust of wind. "Well," he said, latching on to the one thing he could, "Kara's neighborhood is fantastic. Great schools, great long-term investment." "Totally," I said, voice light, "although technically it's not her name on the deed." The table fell still. Kara's mouth parted. "Excuse me?" I kept my tone neutral. "It's just what the records show. Trevor signed the mortgage. It's public info. You know, Registry of Deeds." Trevor flushed, looking like he'd rather disappear into his mashed potatoes. "We're married," he mumbled. "It's our house." "Of course." "But we both know how banks work." Kara's voice sharpened. "Why would you even look that up?" "I didn't. Someone sent it to me months ago. Said it was funny how I was always the one being compared when I was the only one not owing a bank anything." Dad raised a hand. Okay, this is getting out of hand." "No," I said quietly. "It's finally honest." And that's when I saw it, that flicker in Dad's eyes. Not anger, not pride, doubt. For the first time, he didn't know who the golden child at the table really was. Kara crossed her arms, her voice tight. "I never asked to be compared." I nodded. Neither did I. But it happened anyway. Every holiday, every birthday, every time someone looked through me to get to you. The table was silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I'm not attacking. I'm just done pretending. I reached for my glass and took a slow sip. I built something real. I just didn't need an audience to clap for me along the way. No one moved. Kara looked like she was holding her breath. Trevor's face was frozen, his fork untouched. Mom dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin, lips trembling. And Dad? Dad looked older than I remembered. Not physically, just smaller, like a man who had built a worldview on a foundation that just cracked beneath his feet. Kara's voice came back, low and brittle. "For someone who didn't want attention, you sure timed this pretty perfectly." I tilted my head. "I didn't time anything. You asked when I'd catch up. I simply answered." Trevor shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Let's not make this a competition."
It's always been a competition, I said gently, just one I wasn't told I was in. That hit the table like thunder. Even Mom glanced at Kara for the first time, uncertainty behind her eyes. I kept going. I worked 12-hour days for 3 years. No vacations, no backup plan. I stayed up until 2 a.m. designing pitch decks and learning SEO. I taught myself contracts. I built everything from scratch. I looked around the table. No one asked, not once. Aunt Carol, to her credit, blinked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You skipped 2 Thanksgivings," she murmured. I nodded. And no one called. No one checked in. You just assumed I was floundering, that I was still the one behind. Kara scoffed. "So what, you want applause? A parade for doing your job?" "No," I said. "I wanted a family that didn't measure my worth by how closely I mirrored your life." She looked stunned, like I had spoken in a language she didn't know existed. "I never claimed to be better," I added, "but you all made it very clear I was somehow less, and I believed it until I realized your standards had nothing to do with me." The table didn't move. No one blinked, no one reached for their wine. You praised what you could measure: square footage, job titles, curated photos, but not resilience, not risk, not doing the hard things in silence. Dad finally spoke, voice low. "Why didn't you just tell us?" I turned to him. "Because it wouldn't have mattered. You already decided who I was a long time ago. You put me in a box labeled still trying and never looked inside." He inhaled sharply. "That's not fair." "It's not about fairness," I said. "It's about pattern." Then I turned to Kara. "You're not the villain. But you've never once used your voice to shift the spotlight. You stood in it because it was handed to you and never asked why it was so one-sided." She stared at me. Guilt flickered in her eyes. Or maybe it was something deeper. Recognition? "I didn't know," she said quietly. "You didn't ask, and you never wondered why I stopped showing up." Mom's eyes welled up, her napkin trembling in her fingers. "Stella, I didn't realize," she said, voice cracking at the edge. "I know," I replied, not with spite, but with exhaustion. "That's the problem." The silence that followed wasn't confrontational, it was recognition. The sharp, undeniable kind, the kind that echoed in the quiet between words. Everyone at that table was suddenly aware of something they had refused to acknowledge. I had grown. I had arrived, and they hadn't seen a thing. The air felt different now. Not heavy, not awkward, just honest. I sat back steady, no longer trying to force understanding or reach for empathy that had never been offered. There was power in letting people sit with their own discomfort. I'd spent years holding space for them, patting their egos, laughing at jokes that chipped away at me 1 year at a time. I wasn't doing that anymore. Kara's voice broke the silence again, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know you felt that way." I tilted my head. "Did you ever ask?" She blinked. "I just thought you liked being low-key, that you didn't care about this stuff." "I don't care about stuff," I said. "I care about being seen. Not for what I post, not for what I wear, just for who I am." Trevor looked at Kara, then at me, his voice awkward. "You really paying off the house?" I nodded. "Every cent. No loans, no cosigner, just me." He leaned back, stunned. "Damn." Kara looked like she was unraveling internally, her well-practiced poise faltering. "So you came here just to drop that on us? To make us feel bad?" I shook my head. "No. I came to dinner because I was tired of pretending I was still trying to catch up. I'm not. I just never asked anyone to clap for me along the way." Aunt Carol shifted in her seat. "You always seemed so quiet." "I was quiet," I said, "not small." And that's when I looked to Dad, really looked at him. The man who had spent decades measuring me against a checklist only he understood. "You wanted me to catch up," I said. "But I was never behind. You just never looked." His face slackened, and in that moment, he looked like someone trying to reconcile two versions of a story he thought he knew. "You're right," he said, barely audible. That was all I needed. I folded my napkin and stood. The movement was smooth, deliberate. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't walking out of rage. I was walking out because the chapter had ended. Mom stood slightly. "Stella, wait." I met her gaze with something softer than she expected. "You always wanted me to come home," I said gently, "but never once asked if I was okay. You just wanted updates you could brag about, not the truth of who I was becoming." Her mouth opened, but the words didn't come. I turned to Kara next. "We don't have to be close, but it would have meant something if, just once, you'd pulled me aside and asked how I was doing. Really doing. No filters, no followers, just sister to sister." Her eyes shimmered, no defense left, just silence. Finally, I turned to Dad, the man whose approval I had once chased like oxygen. "You built a world where success looked one way, where love had conditions. I didn't fit, so you didn't see me." He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "Stella, I don't need an apology," I said. "I just needed the truth to be heard." No one moved. No one begged me to stay. And for once, that felt like progress. I slipped on my coat and grabbed my purse. No tears, no outbursts, just clarity. Peace. The door clicked open behind me. The cold air rushed in, stinging my skin in the most refreshing way. I paused at the threshold, turning just slightly. I was never the one who needed to catch up, I said one last time. And I walked out. Not one person called after me, not a single attempt to stop me. And for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like release. The walk to my car was slow and silent. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just still. I slid into the driver's seat, let the engine hum to life, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, watching my breath fog the window. I could still see the outline of the house in the rearview mirror. Warm lights, laughter, the clink of dishes. The show went on without me, and that was okay. For so many years, I thought leaving meant failure, that if I walked out, I was giving up. But as I sat there, engine purring beneath me, I realized something. I hadn't walked out to escape them. I had walked out because I had finally found myself, and I wasn't willing to leave her behind to keep playing a part in their script. Out here in the cold evening air, I wasn't the girl with the folding chairs. I wasn't the forgotten sister or the unfinished version of someone else's success. I was Stella, the woman who built her life quietly, completely, and without compromise. There was no applause, no spotlight, no, we were wrong. But I didn't need it anymore. I remembered something my grandfather once told me when I was 13, sitting on his porch while everyone else took family photos I wasn't invited to. He leaned over, handed me a mug of hot cocoa, and said, "You don't have to shine in their light. You just have to stop forgetting you have your own." That voice echoed in me now, strong, clear. I had spent so long trying to be understood. Now I just needed to be true. They could stay at that table passing by and pretending nothing cracked. But something had, not in anger, but in awareness. The way a mirror breaks when it finally reflects too much truth. And when they eventually sat down next year, maybe they'd notice the empty chair. Maybe they'd remember what was said, not because it was loud, but because it was real. Maybe Kara would finally wonder what it cost me to sit silently year after year. Or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I was free. No more approving, no more shrinking, no more waiting to be seen in a house built to overlook me because I was not behind. I had already arrived, and I wasn't going back. Have you ever been made to feel like the afterthought at your own family table? Like your quiet success didn't count because it didn't come with applause? Share your story in the comments I'll be reading. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more stories of resilience, truth, and quiet power. You're not behind. You're just not where they expected you to be. And that's your power.